Warriors Don't Cry, Chapter 3. By the time we arrived home from Cincinnati, my life was already upside down. I was living with one concern, preparing to take part in the integration of Central High School. It consumed much of the time and energy of my entire family. I could see it was consuming the energy of the entire city. Nobody I spoke with or watched on local television or heard on the radio talked of anything else. I was drowning in unfamiliar activities and sounds, the sound of the constant ringing telephone, of people talking loud in my ear and expressing their views about integration, of reporters' urgent voices describing what integration might do to the city and the South, and of official-looking adults lecturing me about integration for hours in closed meetings. Meetings. My life was filled with meetings. Boring meetings with the white superintendent of schools, the school board, with Central High School officials, with NAACP officials. For the first time, I met Mrs. Daisy Bates, a petite and smartly dressed, steely-eyed woman who was the Arkansas state president of the NAACP. She seemed very calm and brave considering the caravans of segregationists said to be driving past her house and tossing firebombs and rocks through her windows. They saw her as their enemy, not only because of her position, but because she and her husband owned the Arkansas State Press, a newspaper that was the sole voice of our community. The only good thing about the meetings was that they allowed me to visit with my friends, the other students who would be integrating Central. I had known most of them all my life. At one point, there had been 16 others, but some of them chose not to participate because of the threats of violence. It frightened me to see our numbers dwindling. Still, I was delighted with those I knew were definitely going. In the end, there were 9 of us. Ernest Green, the oldest and a senior, was a member of my church. His warm eyes and quick smile greeted me each week at Sunday school. His aunt, Mrs. Gravely, had taught me history in junior high. Tall, thin Terrence Roberts was a junior like me and a friend since first grade. He was a very verbal person who could be counted on to give the funniest, most intelligent analysis of any situation. I adored his way of always humming a cheerful tune when he wasn't talking. Jefferson Thomas was a quiet, soft-spoken athlete, tops in his class. His sense of humor was subtle, the kind that makes you giggle aloud when you're not supposed to. Elizabeth Eckford was petite, a very quiet, bright person who had smiled and waved at me across the hallway at our old school. She was regal in her bearing and, like all of us, very serious about her studies. Selma Mothershed and I were friends who saw each other frequently. Small like Elizabeth, but with a very pale complexion, her wise eyes peered through thick-lensed, horn-rimmed glasses. She had a heart problem that at times changed her pallor to a purplish hue and forced her to rest on her haunches to catch her breath. Best of all, my special friend Minna Jean Brown was going. Since she lived only a block away from me, we saw each other almost every day. We had much in common. Both of us were tall for our age, and we shared daydreams, our worship of Johnny Mathis and Nat Cole, and our desire to sing. Carlotta Walls was an athlete, very sleek and wonderfully energetic. Everything she said or did was quickly executed. She was a girl-next-door type, always in a good mood, always ready to try something new. Gloria Ray was another member of my Sunday school class. Delicate in stature, she was as meticulous about her attire as she was about her studies. Her all-knowing eyes grew even more intense as she spoke in softly measured words. Please stop here and consider question number 1. We integrating students shared many things in common. All of our parents were strict, no-nonsense types. Several of them were teachers and preachers or held well-established positions in other professions. All of our folks were hardworking people who had struggled to own their homes, to provide a stable life for their families. We shared many of the same family values traditional to all small-town Americans. Our parents demanded that we behave appropriately at home and in public. I couldn't imagine that any one of us would ever talk back to our folks or other adults. All of us were church-going. All our parents demanded good grades in school. Although none of us had a lot of money, we had pride in our appearance. Most of all, we were individualists with strong opinions. Each of us planned to go to college. I felt comfortable being with them because they were the kind of people my mother allowed me to associate with. And after a period of being together so much, I began to feel as though we had formed some kind of group, an odd family of people with one goal, to get inside Central High and stay there for the school year. Please stop here and consider question number 2. On Monday, September 2nd, Labor Day, our family gathered at Auntie May's house for the last picnic of the summer. She was Mother's sister, a wonderfully round, cuddly woman with flowing wavy hair and a warm smile. A real live wire, she liked to play pranks on people and tell the kind of naughty jokes that made Mother blush and cover my ears. Her laughter and upbeat attitude always cheered me up. People say I had some of her feisty ways in me. I was certain my Auntie May could do just about anything. "Rules are made to be broken," she said. "If there's anyone who can integrate that school, it's you. You're just sassy enough to pull it off." "Although I don't know why you'd want to go where you're not wanted," said Uncle Charlie, Mother's brother, puffing on his cigar. "To heck with them," said Auntie May. "Besides, I heard a rumor that Governor Faubus is going to send the National Guard over to the school." "How do you know that?" "Mammy Johnson's cousin cooks for that school. They called her to tell her she has to check in tomorrow to get past the soldiers." That began a free-for-all about integration. It was just what I didn't want to hear. So I drifted off into my daydreams about Vince, the cute boy I liked. I pictured what it might have been like to have him pick me up in his new car at our old school where everybody could see. Later on that night, Grandma thought we should listen to the governor's speech on television. To our amazement, he announced he had sent troops to Central. And then he said, "They will not act as segregationists or integrationists, but as soldiers called to active duty to carry out their assigned tasks." Then he spoke the words that made chills creep up and down my spine. "But I must state here in all sincerity that it is my opinion, yes, even a conviction, that it will not be possible to restore or maintain order or protect the lives and property of citizens if forcible integration is carried out tomorrow in the schools of this community." "The governor has finally flipped his wig," Mother Lois said, glaring at the moon-faced man on the TV screen. On the night of the governor's speech, the phone didn't stop ringing. One caller said he knew our address and would be right over to bomb the house. Grandma went directly to her room where she took the shotgun she called Mr. Higginbottom from its leather case in the back of her closet. That night she set up her guard post near the window to the side yard where she thought we were most vulnerable. She sat in her rocking chair beside the antique mahogany end table given her by her mother. After a moment for contemplation and prayer, she stretched her embroidery work tightly over its hoop. With her needles and threads, she settled down for the night with Mr. Higginbottom across her lap. She sat as erect as those heroic soldiers I'd seen in magazine pictures. As I tried to fall asleep, I could hear Grandma rocking back and forth in her chair singing hymns that must have given her the strength to stay alert all night. That night, in my diary, I wrote to God, "Maybe going to Central High isn't such a good idea after all. It is costing my family a lot of agony and energy, and I haven't even attended one day yet. Will Grandma always have to sit up guarding us? She can't go on sitting there forever. What will become of us? Maybe I should start my plan for moving to Cincinnati. Please give me some sign of what I am to do." Please stop here and consider question number 3. Late Monday evening, the shrill ring of the phone awakened me. Mother took the call from the NAACP telling us not to attend school the next day, Tuesday. We were to wait until we were notified before going to Central. Early the next morning, I caught Grandmother nodding at her guard post as I went out to pick up the newspaper. The headlines told the story. "Faubus calls National Guard to keep schools segregated. Troops take over at Central High. Negroes told to wait." Arkansas Gazette, Tuesday, September 3rd, 1957. Tuesday afternoon, School Superintendent Virgil Blossom called a meeting of the 9 of us students and our folks. During that meeting, the tall, stocky, grim-faced Blossom breathlessly instructed our parents not to come to school with us the next day. "It will be easier to protect the children if adults aren't there," he said. The looks on the faces of the adults told me they were all frightened. Not one among them seemed certain of what they were doing. As we arrived home, the man on the radio explained Federal Judge Ronald Davies's ruling, ordering integrated class to begin on Wednesday. The phone was ringing off the hook. Our ministers said some of the church members were forming a group made up of people from several churches. They would pray and work for peace in the city. At the same time, he said, they would be ready to help us if we needed it. The call just after midnight from the NAACP didn't really disturb us because we were already receiving a series of late-night calls from segregationists who were loud and vulgar in their views. Mrs. Bates said we would meet at 12th and Park. The school was between 14th and 16th on Park. Perhaps we would be accompanied by several ministers, some of them would be white. She named Reverend Dunbar Ogden Jr., the white president of the Interracial Ministerial Alliance, and 2 of our ministers, Reverend Z.Z. Driver of the African Methodist Episcopal Church and Reverend Harry Bass of the Methodist Episcopal Church. Judge orders integration. Arkansas Gazette, Tuesday, September 3rd, 1957. Dear Diary, it's happening today. What I'm afraid of most is that they won't like me and integration won't work and Little Rock won't become like Cincinnati, Ohio. Please stop here and consider question number 4. By Wednesday morning, September 4th, I could hardly believe what was really happening. I was going to Central High School. As I prepared breakfast before leaving home on that first morning, Grandmother India stood over my shoulder watching while I cracked the breakfast eggs for poaching. Every radio in the house was tuned to the stations that gave frequent news reports. The urgent voices grabbed our attention whether we wanted them to or not. I'd never heard the news read that often except when there was a tornado. Hundreds of Little Rock citizens are gathered in front of Central High School awaiting the arrival of the Negro children. We're told people have come from as far away as Mississippi, Louisiana, and Georgia to join forces to halt integration. Grandma took my hand as she started the blessing, asking the Lord to protect me. I closed my eyes, but not even the breakfast blessing could halt the thoughts buzzing through my mind. As we ate, I hoped no one noticed that I pushed my food around my plate because my stomach didn't want breakfast. Mother spoke my name softly, and I looked up at her. You don't have to integrate this school. Your grandmother and I will love you, no matter what you decide. But I have no choice if we're going to stay in Little Rock, I said. I couldn't stop hoping that integrating Central High School was the first stop to making Little Rock just like Cincinnati, Ohio. Besides, we had been told students of Little Rock's richest and most important white families attended there. They were also probably very smart. As soon as those students got to know us, I had total faith they would realize how wrong they had been about our people. A lot has changed in the 2 years since you signed up to go to Central. You were younger then, Mother said with a frown on her face. Maybe it was a hasty decision, a decision we'll all regret. Before Mama Lois could say another word, the phone rang. Conrad raced to answer, but Mother was there first. Keep your seat, young man. As she held the phone to her ear, she stood motionless and silent, and her face grew ashen and drawn. Then she slowly replaced the receiver in its cradle and said, It's time to go. Please stop here and consider question number 5. Chapter 4. As we walked down the front steps, Mother paused and turned to look back at Grandma, who was standing at the edge of the porch. In their glance, I saw the fear they had never voiced in front of me. Grandma lingered for a moment and then rushed to encircle me in her arms once more. God is always with you, she whispered as she blinked back tears. Trailing behind Mother, I made my way down the concrete path as she climbed into the driver's seat behind the wheel of our green Pontiac. Mother pressed the gas pedal and we gained speed. I always watched closely because I wanted my license on my 16th birthday, only 3 months away. I knew the process well by now. She had guided me through practice sessions in the parking lot next to the grocery store often enough. We moved through the streets in silence, listening to the newsman's descriptions of the crowds gathering at Central High School. I noticed some of our neighbors standing on the sidewalk, many more than were usually out at this time of day. That's strange, Mama mumbled as she waved to people who didn't bother waving back. No matter, maybe they didn't see me. Our neighbors had always been so friendly, but now they peered at us without the usual smiles. When I saw Kathy and Rhonda, 2 of my school friends, standing with their mothers, anxious to catch their attention, I waved out the window with a loud, "Hi!" Their disapproving glances matched those of the adults. I didn't do anything to them, I said, not understanding their reason. Then you don't have anything to be concerned about. Mother Lois maneuvered through the unusually heavy traffic. I don't know where all the cars could have come from, she said. We both craned our necks, curious about all the unfamiliar cars and people. Certainly, there had never been so many white people driving down the streets of our quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. Please stop here and consider question number 6. The voice on the radio grew more urgent as the announcer described the ranks of Arkansas National Guardsmen who ringed Central High School. Hearing the news as we drew near our destination, Mother said, I think I'll park here. The meeting place is quite a ways away, but from the looks of things, we won't get any closer. The announcer said it was 7:55 as Mama squeezed into a parking space, and we settled ourselves quietly for a moment, trying to identify the buzzing noise that seemed as if it were all around us. It resembled the sounds of crowds at my high school football games, but how could that be? The announcer said there was a crowd, but surely it couldn't be that big. Anxious to see the familiar faces of our friends or some of our own people, we hurried up the block lined with wood-framed houses and screened-in porches. I strained to see what lay ahead of us. In the distance, large crowds of white people were lining the curb directly across from the front of Central High. As we approached behind them, we could only see the cluster of white people that stretched for a distance of 2 blocks along the entire span of the school building. My mind could take in the sights and sounds only one by one. Flashing cameras, voices shouting in my ears, men and women jostling each other, old people, young people, people running, uniformed police officers walking, men standing still, men and women waving their fists, and then the long line of uniformed soldiers carrying weapons, just like in the war movies I had seen. Everyone's attention seemed riveted on the center of the line of soldiers where a big commotion was taking place. At first, we couldn't see what they were looking at. People were shouting and pointing, and the noise hurt my ears and muffled the words. We couldn't understand what they were saying. As we drew near, the angry outbursts became even more intense, and we began to hear their words more clearly. "Niggers go home! Niggers, go back to where you belong!" I stood motionless, stunned by the hurtful words. I searched for something to hang on to, something familiar that would comfort me or make sense, but there was nothing. 2, 4, 6, 8, we ain't gonna integrate. Over and over the words rang out. The terrifying frenzy of the crowd was building like steam in an erupting volcano. "We have to find the others," Mommy yelled in my ear. "We'll be safer with the group." She grabbed my arm to pull me forward out of my trance. The look on her face mirrored the terror I felt. Some of the white men and women standing around us seemed to be observing anxiously. Others, with angry faces and wide-open mouths, were screaming their rage. Their words were becoming increasingly vile, fueled by whatever was happening directly in front of the school. The sun beat down on our heads as we made our way through the crowd, searching for our friends. Most people ignored us, jostling each other and craning their necks to see whatever was at the center of the fury. Finally, we got closer to the hub of activity. Standing on our toes, we stretched as tall as we could to see what everyone was watching. "Oh, my Lord," Mother said. It was my friend, Elizabeth, they were watching. The anger of that huge crowd was directed toward Elizabeth Eckford as she stood alone in front of Central High, facing the long line of soldiers, with a huge crowd of white people screeching at her back. Barely 5 feet tall, Elizabeth cradled her books in her arms as she desperately searched for the right place to enter. Soldiers in uniforms and helmets, cradling their rifles, towered over her. Slowly, she walked first to one, and then another opening in their line. Each time she approached, the soldiers closed ranks, shutting her out. As she turned toward us, her eyes hidden by dark glasses, we could see how erect and proud she stood despite the fear she must have been feeling. As Elizabeth walked along the line of guardsmen, they did nothing to protect her from her stalkers. When a crowd of 50 or more closed in like diving vultures, the soldiers stared straight ahead as if posing for a photograph. Once more, Elizabeth stood still, stunned, not knowing what to do. The people surrounding us shouted, stomped, and whistled as though her awful predicament were a triumph for them. I wanted to help her, but the human wall in front of us would not be moved. We could only wedge through part way. Finally, we realized our efforts were futile. We could only pray as we watched her struggle to survive. People began to applaud and shout, "Get her! Get the nigger out of here! Hang her black ass!" Not one of those white adults attempted to rescue Elizabeth. The hulking soldiers continued to observe her peril like spectators enjoying a sport. Under siege, Elizabeth slowly made her way toward the bench at the bus stop. Looking straight ahead as she walked, she did not acknowledge the people yelping at her heels like mad dogs. Mother and I looked at each other, suddenly conscious that we, too, were trapped by a violent mob. Ever so slowly, we eased our way backward through the crowd, being careful not to attract attention. But a white man clawed at me, grabbing my sleeve and yelling, "We got us a nigger right here!" Just then another man tugged at his arm, distracting him. Somehow I managed to scramble away. As the commotion began building around us, Mother took my arm and we moved fast, sometimes crouching to avoid attracting more attention. We gained some distance from the center of the crowd and made our way down the block. But when I looked back, I saw a man following us, yelling, "They're getting away! Those niggers are getting away!" Pointing to us, he enlisted others to join him. Now we were being chased by 4 men and their numbers were growing. We scurried down the sidewalk, bumping into people. Most of the crowd was still preoccupied watching Elizabeth. Panic-stricken, I wanted to shout for help, but I knew it would do no good. Policemen stood by watching Elizabeth being accosted. Why would they help us? "Melba, take the keys," Mother commanded as she tossed them at me. Get to the car. Leave without me if you have to. Please stop here and consider question number 7. I plucked the car keys from the air. No, Mama, I won't go without you. Suddenly I felt the sting of her hand as it struck the side of my face. She had never slapped me before. Do what I say, she shouted. Still, I knew I couldn't leave her there. I reached back to take her arm. Her pace was slowing and I tried to pull her forward. The men were gaining on us. If we yelled for help or made any fuss, others might join our attackers. Running faster, I felt myself begin to wear out. I didn't have enough breath to keep moving so fast. My knees hurt, my calves were aching, but the car was just around the next corner. The men chasing us were joined by another carrying a rope. At times, our pursuers were so close I could look back and see the anger in their eyes. Mama's pace slowed, and one man came close enough to touch her. He grabbed for her arm, but instead tugged at her blouse. The fabric ripped, and he fell backwards. Mama stepped out of her high-heeled shoes, leaving them behind her, her pace quickening in stocking feet. One of the men closest to me swung at me with a large tree branch, but missed. I felt even more panic rise up in my throat. If he hit me hard enough to knock me over, I would beat at his mercy. I could hear Grandma India's voice saying, God is always with you, even when things seem awful. I felt a surge of strength and a new wind. As I turned the corner, our car came into sight. I ran hard, faster than ever before, unlocked the door, and jumped in. Mother was struggling, barely able to keep ahead of her attackers. I could see them turning the corner close on her heels, moving fast toward us. I swung open the passenger door for Mother and revved the engine. Barely waiting for her to shut the door, I shoved the gear shift into reverse and backed down the street with more speed than I'd ever driven forward. I slowed to back around the corner. One of the men caught up and pounded his fists on the hood of our car, while another threw a brick at the windshield. Turning left, we gained speed as we drove through the hail of shouts and stones and glaring faces, but I knew I would make it because the car was moving fast and Mama was with me. We sped away from Central High School, neighborhood, and into more familiar streets where we should have felt safe. Mother directed me not to drive straight home but to circle around until we knew for certain that the men from the mob weren't chasing us. Even though I didn't have a license and had only practiced driving in the parking lot, she wouldn't allow me to stop so we could switch places. Her face was drained and her eyes haunted by the kind of fear I had not seen in her before. Please stop here and consider question number 8. As I drove, I couldn't help noticing that the streets were clogged with cars and people that did not belong in our neighborhood. There were dust-covered trucks full of tobacco-chewing white men, their naked arms and shoulders sporting tattoos. When we pulled into our backyard, Grandmother India was waiting for us with an anxious expression. "Thank God, you made it home," she gasped. "What about Elizabeth and the others? Have you heard anything?" Yes, but let's get inside. Hurry, child, hurry." Grandma India ushered us through the back door. As we entered the house, I saw that she had locked all the doors and the windows and pulled all the shades. As soon as we were safely inside, she piled chairs against the locked back door. "So what about Elizabeth?" I said. "I think she's safe. A white woman and man sat with her on the bus bench, protecting her from those awful people clawing at her. Then they got on the bus with her and rode away, so she's okay." "And the others? Terry and Ernie and those guys?" "The soldiers turned them away from the school just like they did Elizabeth. They're safe. They didn't catch as much trouble because they were in the large group with Mrs. Bates and some of those ministers, but they still didn't have no Sunday picnic. They had to get out of there real fast." Even though Mother looked exhausted, nothing would do for her but to get dressed and go to work. "We've got to lead as normal a life as possible," she argued as we described to Grandma what had happened to us. "One report said those troops were armed with rifles, nightsticks, and bayonets. Did you see any of that, Melba?" Yes, ma'am. I think I saw guns." "Maybe things got mixed up. Perhaps the governor had them there to keep the peace, and they mixed up their orders," Grandma mused. "Seems to me they had ample opportunity to keep the peace by protecting Elizabeth." Mother Lois sounded very angry. "I think this situation is different than what we bargained for. We'd better let things cool off a bit. You can go back to Horace Mann for now." Grandma squared her shoulders and said, "I don't see how that will solve anything. Pretty soon white folks will think it's as okay to enslave us as it is to use soldiers to keep our kids out of school." Mother stood in silence, pondering Grandma's words for a long moment. Her expression reflected the painful realization that maybe what Grandma said was true. And then suddenly she said,
I had almost forgotten. I had to speak to you, Melba, and I want you to listen closely to every word and obey. Under no circumstances must you ever mention to anyone what happened to us this morning. Even if you have to tell a white lie and say we didn't go to Central, we have to keep this our secret. Telling a white lie was something she never before given me permission to do. She swore me to absolute silence, saying, above all else, those men must not connect us with their ugly deed. If we told the story and they found out who they were chasing, they might come after us to finish the job. As she spoke, her voice quavered and her hands shook. I had never seen her so uncontrolled. She looked the way I felt, battered and weary. Finally she instructed, Melba, don't you dare go outside, girl. I want to know where you are every moment. She pulled on her jacket, peeked through the glass in the front door, then hurried out onto the porch, almost running around the house to the car. I resigned myself to the fact that Grandma wouldn't allow me to visit Thelma or Minnie or any of my friends who lived nearby. I wanted to call them for more news of what happened to them, but before I could pick up the receiver, the phone began to ring off the hook. Don't you dare answer, Grandma shouted to me from the kitchen. I think I want to go back to Horace Mann, I told my grandmother. At least I'll have assignments and friends and all sorts of wonderful first day of school things to do. One little setback and you want out, she said. Nah, you're not a quitter. In my diary I wrote, I was disappointed to not see what it is inside Central High School. I don't understand why the governor sent grown-up soldiers to keep us out. I don't know if I should go back. But Grandma is right. If I don't go back, they will think they have won. They will think they can use soldiers to frighten us, and we'll always have to obey them. They'll always be in charge if I don't go back to Central and make integration happen. Please stop here and consider question number 9. By late afternoon, the ringing phone, the hot weather, and my confinement were driving me nuts. So when the phone rang, I grabbed for it. Where were you? I could hear annoyance in Minijine's voice. I was there, I said, across the street. I saw Elizabeth being chased by those ugly people. Why was she alone? Remember, she doesn't have a phone, so she didn't get that midnight call. She didn't know where or when to meet us. Mama and I barely made it out of there, I said, being cautious not to tell all. We got out of there as fast as we could. First we went to the superintendent's office. We waited there for an hour, sitting on those hard benches. Then Mrs. Bates dragged us on to the United States Attorney's office to see Mr. Cobb. Why? She said since Judge Davies made a federal order, we should go there, but Cobb sent us to the FBI office. That was kind of secret and fun. Those guys look just the way they do on television, like they know something, but they won't tell. Yeah, but what did they do? Asked a lot of questions and wrote the answers down. Questions? Yeah, about where we stood and who did what to us. It took hours and I was sweating so bad I thought I would die. Well, are they going to do anything? Investigate. They said they'd investigate. Sure, by that time we could be dead. You ain't kidding. That mob was outright nasty. I gotta go now, but can you meet me in 15 minutes and we'll go to the community center? The community center? I whispered. It seemed like forever since I'd had an ordinary afternoon there, listening to records and talking to friends who didn't use the word integration. I thought about the wonderful times Minijine and I had shared, times when our greatest concern was saving enough allowance to buy a new record or praying to be asked to walk to the cafeteria with the right boy. Maybe our lives would be that way again. I tiptoed past Grandma, peacefully snoozing in her rocking chair. Suddenly she was awake. Just where do you think you're going, Missy? To the community center. I didn't want to disturb you. I thought you were sleeping. Uh-huh. Have a seat. The best you can do is let up a window, but you ain't going to no community center. I couldn't stop the rush of tears. I ran to my room and fell onto the bed, burying my face in the pillow to hide the sobs that wrenched my insides. All my disappointment over not getting into Central High and the mob chase, as well as the big sudden changes in my life over the past few weeks, came crashing in on me. Then I heard Grandma India patting across the room and felt the weight of her body shift the plane of the mattress as she sat down. You had a good cry, girl? Her voice was sympathetic, but also one sliver away from being angry. Yes, ma'am. You make this your last cry. You're a warrior on the battlefield for your Lord. God's warriors don't cry, 'cause they trust that He's always by their side. The women of this family don't break down in the face of trouble. We act with courage, and with God's help we'll ship trouble right on out. But I tried to explain. But nothing. Now you get yourself together, read the 23rd Psalm, and don't ever let me see you behave this way again." "Yes, ma'am." The anger in her voice hurt my feelings, but her warm hand patted my arm to reassure me of her love. From then on, I knew I could only cry when no one would hear me. Please stop here and consider question number 10. The shrill ring of the telephone upset me even more now that I had seen my enemies. I imagined the callers to resemble those men who had chased me. It felt as though they were entering my home each time they called. I could tell Mother felt the same way. With each ring, her expression turned grimmer. "I'll get it." Conrad's voice was less enthusiastic than usual, but still he made his chase for the phone until he was ordered to halt. Grandma had interrupted her cooking to hurry to the phone. She called to me from the hallway. "Sounds like maybe that boy Vince, the polite one from the church that we usually see at the wrestling matches." Grandma beckoned me to take the receiver. Vince, I thought to myself as my heart leaped with joy. Sure, I knew very well who Vince was. He attended high school in a neighboring town, but he was in my Sunday school class. It was Grandma who didn't really know that Vince was my secret pretend dreamboat boyfriend. I wasn't at all certain he knew it. He was at least 2 years older than me and drove a new Chevy and looked sort of like a caramel-colored James Darren. "Make this conversation brief, honey," Grandma said as she handed me the phone. "Hello," I said, using the sexy whisper dictated by romance magazines. "Melba?" It wasn't Vince's voice saying my name. "Yes," I answered in a polite tone, dropping my pretense. The voice wasn't at all familiar to me. "Melba, nigger, I know where you live. 12th and Cross. We're gonna get you tonight. Long about midnight." I heard the receiver click, and he was gone. Did he know where my bedroom was? Would he come over now? Did he have a bomb? I couldn't tell Mom and the others that he knew so much about us, so I choked back tears. As I entered the living room, faces turned my way in anticipation. I pretended to smile and said it was somebody else, another friend, not Vince. I thought it was a sign that we were feeling more confident when we turned the television set off in the middle of the uproar about Central and took our places at the dinner table. After the blessing, the topic turned to what was really on our minds. "I'll keep watch again tonight," Grandma said. Mother studied her plate for a long moment before she looked up at Grandma. "Maybe you could get some sleep tonight, and I could stand guard?" "That would be a real good idea, except you don't know how to shoot a gun. This is no time for on-the-job training." Grandma was an expert marksman. As a railroad man, Grandpa had spent lots of time away from home. He had insisted Grandma learn to use the gun to protect herself because they had lived in an isolated area in the early years of their marriage. "God does not forgive those who kill others," Grandma said. "Expert marksmanship is a must, because you always got to aim for fingers or toes, and them's small targets." Please stop here and consider question number 11.